Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take stacks of source material articles, research, or in today's case, a deep theological essay, and guide you straight to the nuggets of insight that matter most.
And today, we are really opening up one of the Bible's most poignant and complex family stories.
A story that our source material defines with just incredible brevity. It says, the story of Edom is the story of family gone wrong and providence gone right.
That's a stunning way to put it, isn't it? It just immediately sets the scope so much wider than, just a history lesson about some minor ancient kingdom.
It does. And we are undertaking this deep dive based on a very thoughtful Bible essay, one written for adult Christians.
And the aim, as the author sets it out, is really twofold. It's for worship and wisdom.
Right. Worship because we want to see the Lord's powerful, sovereign hand at work in the sometimes tangled and often tragic events of human history.
And wisdom because we need to learn how we, too, are meant to live humbly and securely under his rule.
It's aiming for that kind of humility you see in Psalm 33, where God frustrates the plans of nations, but his own plan, his own counsel, stands forever.
And to really understand Edom, you have to start at the very beginning. Before the nation, even before the man himself, with a foundational oracle.
Yes, this whole study really pivots on a prophetic word spoken to Rebekah before her twin sons, Jacob and Esau, were even born.
That's in Genesis 25:23.
And the word was just so clear and so deterministic. It said, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger.
And you have to see, that wasn't just a prediction of some kind of sibling rivalry.
No.
It was a divine blueprint. It was establishing the covenant line right there. It set out 2 totally divergent destinies that would shape, everything that followed.
Not just for them, but for their descendants.
Exactly. Jacob, of course, becomes Israel. He's the line that carries the covenant promise, the one that eventually leads to the Messiah.
But Esau, who becomes Edom, he tragically and consistently chose a path that put him in direct opposition to that promise.
He becomes the adversary, often arrayed in his heart and in his actions against his brother's children.
And what's so striking, and the essay really emphasizes this, is how the prophets use Edom later on.
Oh, absolutely.
Edom isn't just some historical footnote. It becomes this living, vivid warning in Scripture.
It's a case study.
It is. It shows us what happens when a small thing, a moment of bitterness, a short-sighted choice, is allowed to harden over generations.
And it hardens into systemic violence. When humility is just replaced by this crippling, dangerous pride. You see it in Obadiah, you see it in Malachi.
The warnings are severe.
They are. So, to guide our time, we're going to follow the structure that's laid out in the essay.
Correct.
We'll start with the historical and cultural background, then move into the biblical narrative of their conflict.
And after that, the theological significance, and then finally the part that brings it home for us, the spiritual application.
Right. And our approach here is a plain reading of the text. We're keeping Israel and the church distinct and just trusting that God keeps his promises exactly as he spoke them.
Whether that's Israel's irrevocable calling or the specifics of the Messiah's birth.
Precisely. So with that foundation laid, I think we're ready to begin.
Let's do it. Let's start with the very ground Edom walked on, because in the ancient world, geography is often destiny. So when we talk about Edom, we're immediately talking about the rugged heights of Mount Seir.
That's right. Genesis 36 places them there, south of the Dead Sea. And it's this incredible land of high red rock ridges and these narrow, defensible canyons.
Can you kind of paint a picture for us? Why was that geography so crucial to who they became?
Well, you could argue their geography was the first source of their undoing. The name Edom itself means red.
Which we'll get back to with Esau stew.
Exactly. But the land, it perfectly mirrors the name. It's a land of this striking deep red sandstone, all carved out by wind and water.
So when you picture Seir, you should be picturing a massive natural fortress.
That's it. The steep approaches. The famous cliff cities like Petra later on. They carved their homes and their treasuries right out of the rock face.
And that gave them this almost unshakable illusion of security.
An illusion. That's the key word. That natural defense system, it becomes a mindset, doesn't it? It's not just about military strategy.
No, it's about a feeling of psychological invulnerability.
Precisely. Their physical security fostered this internal conviction that they were completely untouchable.
And that geographical pride, that's what the sources say is the birthplace of their arrogance.
It is. It culminates in that That stunning question in Obadiah, which just perfectly captured the heart of Edom.
Who can bring me down to the ground?
Exactly. They looked at their rock walls and believed they were impenetrable, maybe even stronger than God himself.
And that geographical advantage was then compounded by their economic situation. They weren't just secure, they were rich.
Very rich. And that was largely due to them controlling the King's Highway.
For anyone unfamiliar with ancient trade, explain the significance of that route.
Okay, so the King's Highway was, think of it as the I-95 of the ancient world. It was the critical international artery.
It wasn't just some local trail.
Not at all. It linked the incredible wealth of Arabia and the Gulf of Aqaba spices, incense, all of that. And it ran all the way north toward Damascus and the Mediterranean.
And if you control the crossroads of that kind of trade, you control the cash flow.
You do. And the Bible confirms this. We see in Numbers and 1 Kings that Edom accumulated a lot of treasure by taxing all the caravans that had to pass through their land.
So it's a perfect storm.
It's a textbook example. They had natural defense, they had strategic control over wealth, and they levied taxes that kept that wealth flowing in.
The essay notes that in places like that, pride and purse reinforce one another.
A great line. Their location and their bank account both screamed self-sufficiency. It just fueled that delusion that they didn't have to answer to anyone.
But the real backstory, the deeper story, it isn't about rocks and trade. It's about family.
It's about a moment of profound short-sightedness, the red and reckless origin story.
Let's go back to that name. Esau was called Edom, meaning red, and it comes from that fateful bowl of red stew.
That famous transaction in Genesis 25. Esau comes in, he's exhausted from the hunt, and he trades his entire future, his covenantal future, for one meal.
And the Bible's judgment on that choice is just. It's uncompromising.
It is. Later in Hebrews, it's remembered as a decision that was godless and short-sighted. It proved he despised his spiritual inheritance.
And it's important to be clear about what that birthright actually meant. It wasn't just about getting more land, was it?
No, not at all. It was so much more profound. The birthright, yes, it carried the double portion of inheritance, but more importantly, it was about spiritual headship.
The priesthood of the family.
Priesthood of the family, and crucially, it carried the line of the Abrahamic covenant.
The promise that through his family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed.
And by trading it away, he was basically saying, I value this present meal more than the eternal promise of God. He chose immediate comfort over a spiritual future.
Which is such a stark contrast to Jacob the younger, who gets the blessing through, well, divine purpose and providence.
And even though the brothers themselves do manage to reconcile personally later on,
In Genesis 33, yeah.
their national lines, their descendants, they part ways fundamentally. Jacob stays in Canaan because of God's promise.
And Esau settles in Seir by his own choice. He takes his wealth and finds his own place.
So the nations they founded, they inherited far more than just territory. They inherited a posture.
A posture, what do you mean by that?
Well, Israel was called to be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests committed to this promise. Edom, on the other hand, chose to live by its own strength, positioned to profit from its brother's journey.
And what's so fascinating is how God governs Edom, even though they are outside of that specific redemptive covenant.
This is a beautiful theological tension here. It shows God's ultimate sovereignty over everything.
So on one hand, Israel was commanded not to despise an Edomite.
Because he is your brother, Deuteronomy 23.7.
But at the same time, Israel was strictly forbidden from trying to conquer or seize Edomite land.
Yes, Deuteronomy 2.4-5 is so clear. God says he had already given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession.
That's a huge concept.
It is. It shows that God's rule extends beyond just the covenant people. He sets the boundaries and the times for all nations. Edom had rights given by God even if Edom didn't acknowledge him.
And this divine restraint, it sets up an incredible test of trust for Israel later on.
It really does, because when that first national conflict happens and Edom refuses Israel passage through the King's Highway.
Which was a huge insult and a massive inconvenience.
A massive one. But Israel wasn't allowed to fight. They were told to turn away.
So they were essentially commanded to trust that God would get them to the promised land his way.
Without using force against their brother, even when that brother was being hostile, they had to pay for food and water and take the long way around.
So how does a nation reconcile that? Being told not to fight back against such an insult, doesn't that risk looking weak to everyone else?
And that's the whole point of the test, isn't it? It requires this radical trust. God was teaching Israel from the very beginning that their victory, their destiny, it relies entirely on his promise.
Not on their military might or their ability to force a better outcome.
Exactly. It taught them to bear the slight, to absorb the pain, and to trust the bigger plan. It's a profound lesson in deferring your own human reaction to a divine command.
That really sets the stage for the centuries of conflict to come. A shared heritage, a personal reconciliation, but a national posture that Edom chose, one of mistrust and self-reliance.
A posture that would define their ultimate tragic destiny.
Let's transition now into that biblical narrative and trace how that rift just got deeper and deeper until it was irreparable.
So those early decisions of the twins, they set this persistent motif that runs through the whole story. Esau values the immediate, despises the spiritual.
And Jacob receives the blessing by divine providence.
Right. And this tension, the essay reminds us, it never leaves the page. Fleshly impulse always cuts against spiritual promise.
And that's a struggle you see not just in people, but in nations. Edom, as the descendants of Esau, they basically institutionalized that choice.
They did. They elevated the immediate, the material, the fleshly desire over the long-term spiritual promise of the covenant. And that stance, it quickly moved from just a personal choice to their national policy.
Which brings us right back to that first major flashpoint, the wilderness refusal in Numbers 20.
Israel is finally on the move from Kadesh, and they make a formal request to pass through the King's Highway.
And it was a meticulous, very diplomatic offer. They promised to go straight through, damage nothing.
And critically, to pay for every drop of water and every bit of food they consumed.
They approached Edom as a brother, not as an invading army.
But Edom's response was just immediate, hostile, and absolute. They said no. And then, crucially, they backed it up with a show of massive military force.
They marched out with a strong army. This wasn't just a logistical denial.
No, it was a deep betrayal of that family tie. And the cost of Israel's obedience here is so easy to overlook.
They had to turn away and go all the way around Edom. The inconvenience, the insult, the sheer physical hardship of that much longer journey.
All because they chose to trust God's command over their own, very understandable impulse to fight a hostile relative.
And that moment, it established what the essay calls a settled posture of opposition.
That's right. And this act of hostility, refusing the people of God passage to their promised land, it gets referenced later by the prophets. Amos condemns Edom for pursuing his brother with a sword, casting off all pity.
So this was an ancient hostility that showed its face very early on.
Very early. And the conflict, of course, it only sharpens during the time of the monarchy.
Under King Saul, Edom is basically just listed as one of those hostile neighbors he was always fighting to secure Israel's borders.
They were a constant thorn in the side. But then David comes along, and the whole nature of the relationship changes.
David crushes Edom in the Valley of Salt. This wasn't a skirmish.
No, it was a total military subjugation. He installed garrisons, he put troops there to ensure control. Edom became a resentful vassal state.
And the consequences were brutal. David's general, Joab, stayed behind to strike down every male fit for war.
Eliminating the fighting threat. The Psalms remember this as a great victory for the Lord.
Psalm 60.
But the crucial insight the essay makes is that this military subjugation, it didn't cure the hostility, it just drove the resentment underground.
It just festered, waiting for a moment of Israel's weakness to break free.
And it did. The simmer returned to a boil. Later, during the reign of Jehoram in Judah, Edom successfully revolted. They set up their own king again.
They got their independence back. It shows how deep that desire was to be separate from their Judean relatives.
We also see moments where God miraculously intervenes to protect Judah from them.
Right, during Jehoshaphat's time, a coalition that included men from Mount Seir attacks Judah.
And God delivers Judah without them even raising a sword. He turns the invading armies against each other. It's a powerful sign that God is in command of the battle.
And even when Judah did win decisive victories, like when Amaziah killed 10,000 Edomites and captured a major city,
the pattern of hostility just couldn't be broken. The essay's conclusion here is just stark. It says, even decisive victories could not cure a heart bent against a brother.
The national mission of Edom really became just resisting Israel's peace and trying to profit from Israel's pain.
And this chronic, festering pattern, it all culminates in the darkest chapter of their history, the betrayal and gloating during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem in 586 BC.
This is when the kingdom of Judah is utterly vulnerable. Jerusalem is being captured.
And the Edomites don't just keep their distance, they actively participate in the catastrophe.
This is where the prophet Obadiah's condemnation gains its staggering moral weight.
It does. As Jerusalem burned, as survivors fled, the Edomites joined the plunderers. They gleefully took their share.
But worse, much worse, they stood at the crossroads.
They stood at the crossroads and ambushed Jewish refugees, their own kinsmen, and handed them over to the Babylonians.
This wasn't self-defense. This was collaboration in total destruction.
Obadiah's charges against them are so specific and devastating. Violence against a brother, standing aloof, cutting down fugitives, delivering survivors to the enemy.
And the Lord promises a humiliation that matches their arrogance. Mount Zion will be holy, but Mount Esau will be reduced to stubble.
And you have to just pause and try to grasp the deep emotional pain this betrayal caused. Psalm 137 remembers the Edomite taunt.
They were shouting at the Babylonians, tear it down to its foundations.
And Lamentations has this grim assurance that Edom's brief moment of rejoicing would pass, and the cup of God's judgment would surely come to them, leaving them stripped bare.
The sheer unholy glee in their brother's suffering. That becomes the defining sin of Edom.
It does. And that national betrayal, it sets the stage for the final, unified prophetic sentence against them. It's remarkable how consistently all the prophets speak about Edom's end.
Let's just walk through that consensus. Isaiah uses Edom, specifically its capital Bozrah, as the location for the day of God's vengeance.
He paints this terrifying picture of the Lord treading the winepress of wrath, his garments stained crimson, a symbol of absolute judgment.
Then Jeremiah, who lived through the siege, he focuses on their intellectual pride. He mocks the famous wisdom of Teman, an Edomite region.
A place renowned for its sages, they thought their geopolitical cunning would save them.
But the warning is that worldly wisdom just dries up when God sends bewilderment. Their intellect was useless against a sovereign God.
And then Ezekiel. He charges Mount Seir with ancient hostility, confirming this wasn't just a one-time mistake, but a generational choice.
God promises desolation because Edom rejoiced at Israel's calamity. He says he will make himself known through this judgment.
And the final word comes from Malachi, after the exile. And it's maybe the most definitive.
He contrasts God's electing love for Jacob with his judgment on Esau.
And he issues this chilling decree that serves as Edom's epitaph. If Edom says, we will rebuild, the Lord says, they may build, but I will demolish.
They will be called the wicked land.
The purpose of God just cannot be frustrated by human rebuilding efforts. It's a centuries-long story that ends with this absolute certainty that pride against God's covenant purposes cannot last.
And historically, we see it fulfilled. By the time of the New Testament, the territory is called Idumea. The nation had been scattered.
The name Edom was just a historical reference point, but the sources note this one small, beautiful detail.
Okay.
That crowds from Idumea, from that land of ancient enmity, they came to hear Jesus preach.
Wow.
The nation that boasted in its invulnerability had been humbled and scattered. But even from that place, hungry hearts were drawn to the Messiah. The judgment had done its work.
That entire progression, from prophecy to choice to hostility to judgment, it leads us right into the theological weight of this story. Why did Scripture spend so much time on this family feud?
Well, the essay argues that the ultimate reason for the Edom story is to affirm God's absolute faithfulness to his word.
Regardless of human opposition.
Regardless of anything, God declared his purpose before the boys were even born, and through all the sin and mercy, he brought it to pass. Without failure, without injustice.
And that really is the anchor of the whole thing. It shows God's unwavering ability to keep his covenant.
But we have to be clear about the critical distinction here, the covenant distinction.
Okay, what do you mean?
Jacob's line carried the redemptive covenant, the one that would lead to the promised seed, the Messiah.
Right, who would bless all families of the earth.
Esau's line, Edom, they received common grace blessings, they got land, they were successful for a time, but they stood outside that redemptive covenant.
And often, they actively stood against it.
Exactly. And the source material is very diligent about this point. That historical distinction is vital for us today. Israel remains distinct in God's plan.
Their gifts and calling are irrevocable, as Paul says in Romans.
They are. So the Edom story functions as this powerful pointer toward future restoration for Israel, showing that God is meticulous in fulfilling both promise and judgment.
And that meticulousness means the story isn't just history. The essay says it functions as a type and a test.
Right. Let's unpack those terms.
How does Edom function as a type?
As a type, Edom represents the world's settled, persistent opposition to God's covenant purposes. They are the personification of hostility to God's people.
A stand-in for any nation that rejects God's chosen line and his authority.
That's it. Whenever the world tries to destroy God's plan by attacking his people, it is acting out that Edomite spirit of ancient hostility.
Okay, so that's the type. What about the test? How does Edom's fate serve as a test for all of us?
It acts as this profound moral test of how nations and individuals treat the people through whom God works.
You're talking about the Abrahamic promise.
I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. God established a cosmic plumb line with that promise.
And the oracles against Edom, especially Obadiah, they show the precise mechanism of that curse when it ripens into active cruelty.
So the fate of Edom is a guarantee that God will require an accounting from those who harm his people.
And this national judgment, it also gives us a kind of surgical analysis of pride. It details the false refuges Edom trusted in.
And how the prophets just methodically dismantled them. This is a universal lesson on where we place our security.
So what were those false refuges?
There were three. First, geographical pride, trusting the high cliffs of Seir, believing they were immune to attack.
And Obadiah's rebuttal is famous. The Lord says, even if you make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down.
The rock face cannot hide you from the one who spans heaven and earth. Their very elevation made them a clearer target for judgment.
Okay, second.
Intellectual pride. Jeremiah mocks their reliance on the clever counsel from the sages of Teman.
They thought their geopolitical cunning and their wise leaders would save them.
But the warning is devastating. Worldly wisdom just dries up the moment God decides to send bewilderment. Their greatest boast, their intellect, was useless.
And the third refuge must be their wealth.
Material pride, exactly. Trusting in that constant flow of wealth from the king's highway. They believed their economic strength made them immune to ruin.
But the prophet Haggai says, wealth takes wings and vanishes when God blows on it.
Economic power is fleeting. It's a gift, not a permanent fortress.
So the ultimate theological conclusion about pride, demonstrated through Edom's ruin, is completely universal.
It is. Pride begins with the boast, I am safe, and it ends with the sentence, I am brought low. It's written for every person and every nation that imagines itself beyond the reach of God.
But this leads to a final crucial point you mentioned, the balance of justice and mercy.
Yes. We can't see God as some biased tribal deity who just always favors Israel no matter what they do.
And the story proves otherwise. God disciplined Israel for their sin using foreign powers like Babylon. He allowed them to suffer exile.
But then he judges those same foreign powers, specifically Edom, when they take wicked pleasure in that suffering.
Their sin wasn't just conquering Judah, which God allowed. It was doing it with malicious glee.
With that ancient hostility, God is the Holy One who keeps covenant, and he's defending his own name and reputation among the nations.
So the story ends with God promising to vindicate Zion, to judge Mount Seir, and to bring about that day of perfect harmony.
A day where mercy and truth meet. The historical end of Edom is like a concrete down payment on that eventual promise of cosmic justice.
That brings the history, the narrative, and the theology together in a very sobering way.
And now we have to turn to the essential question the essay is driving toward. How does any of this impact how we live our lives today?
The lessons drawn from Edom are, they're deeply pastoral and very personal. The first one is maybe the most immediate for all of us.
The danger of allowing a grudge to become a legacy, or as the essay calls it, the bitter root.
This takes us right back to the beginning. The brothers themselves, Esau and Jacob, they parted in peace.
They did.
They really did. But the nation that came from Esau, they turned a potential grievance, that resentment over the birthright, into a permanent institutionalized hostility.
That's bitterness hardening into a national policy. It is, and the New Testament uses Esau as a specific warning against this. We're told to guard against letting a bitter root spring up to cause trouble.
Because it doesn't just affect you, it defiles many.
Right. Bitterness is not just an emotion, it's a posture that actively poisons the future.
So the implication for us, for our families, for our churches, is a call to radical forgiveness.
We have to confess jealousy and resentment immediately. We have to refuse to let it settle in and define who we are.
Taking those stinging memories to the cross before they harden into a legacy of hatred that we pass down.
We can't let the fleshly impulse of a moment become the destructive legacy of a lifetime.
The second lesson, it goes right back to that central sin of Edom, humility versus invulnerability.
We talked about their cliffs and how it fostered this illusion that they could never be defeated. Who will bring me down?
But the Lord's response is that altitude, whether it's physical or metaphorical, it doesn't equal safety when sin is at the door.
And for us today, the cliffs are rarely made of stone, are they?
No. There are modern forms of security. A strong financial portfolio that makes us feel untouchable.
Clever strategies, robust social networks, a highly developed intellect that makes us feel superior to
We
others.
can lull ourselves into that same arrogant boast even if we're not saying it out loud. My safety net is too high for failure to reach.
And that is the deception. The scriptural mandate is to trust in the name of the Lord, not in our own chariots or horses.
The only proper boast is in knowing Him who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness.
Humility, when you look at it through the lens of Edom's failure, isn't weakness, it's just reality-based living under a sovereign God.
Acknowledging that everything we have is dependent on Him.
Exactly.
The third lesson is maybe the most sensitive and important one given the theological depth of this essay. Yeah. And that's our posture towards Israel.
The source material really stresses this. Since God's calling and gifts to Israel are irrevocable, Christians have to be extremely vigilant to refuse the Edomite spirit.
And what is that spirit?
It's defined by two things: gloating when Israel stumbles, and rejoicing in their suffering.
Edom's glee in Judah's ruin stands as this powerful rebuke to any heart that would rather see a brother fail than see God's promise stand.
And this isn't about modern politics. It's about maintaining theological clarity and brotherly love.
So, practically speaking, what does refusing the Edomite spirit look like for a believer today?
It looks like prayer and respect. We're called to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to bless rather than curse.
To actively wait for the day when the deliverer comes and, as Scripture says, turns ungodliness from Jacob.
Our honor for God's eternal purposes has to extend to the people. He still calls and gifts, even when there are struggles or disagreements. We can't be found rejoicing over their calamities.
And that leads right into the fourth application, which focuses on those specific crimes at the crossroads.
Justice with compassion. Obadiah condemns the ambush and the handing over of fugitives.
These were acts committed in a moment of national panic and anger. It's the perfect example of profiting from the misery of others.
And this calls us to develop a radically different reflex than the Edomites. God's people are called to shelter the hunted, to guard the weak.
And to absolutely refuse to profit from a neighbor's catastrophic loss.
If we see someone falling, our instinct must not be to grab their wallet or hand them over to their oppressor. The Lord watches how we treat the vulnerable.
So we're instructed to overcome evil with good and leave vengeance to God.
We are. Our ministry is to bear witness to a better kingdom through small acts of mercy that directly contradict the world's self-serving impulses. We must be the safe harbor, not the ambush site.
And finally, the fifth lesson gives us our ultimate hope. It ties everything together.
Resting in the reigning king. Edom's end didn't come because Israel finally got a better army. It came because the Lord judged and the Lord saved.
And that certainty points us directly to the final conclusion of history, Christ's return.
The essay uses a plain reading of prophecy here, reaffirming that the Messiah will reign on David's throne, establishing perfect, absolute justice.
All the promises of restoration and peace will be realized.
Yes, but until that day of final vindication, what is our present mandate?
It's to live quietly, to work diligently with our hands, to keep our hearts free of grudges and pride.
And to rest securely in the God who marks the borders and keeps the books with perfect wisdom. The story of Edom assures us that history isn't just chaos, where the strong win.
No, it's linear. It's moving toward a righteous, sovereign conclusion determined by the covenant-keeping God. The story of the Edomites really does serve as both a mirror and a map for us. It's a mirror, reflecting what becomes of any identity, whether it's an individual or a nation that's built on grievance and pride.
And it's a map tracing the sure, inevitable path of God's justice through time. Edom's ruins teach us a single, undeniable truth.
That security is found not in human fortifications, whether they're rock cliffs or clever financial strategies.
But solely in trusting God's covenant and his perfect plan.
Which brings us back to the closing scripture from the essay, which really summarizes the core warning from Obadiah.
The prophet speaks directly to the source of Edom's failure, its crippling arrogance. He says, "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights. You who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground?"
And the Lord's response is, "Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord."
That warning is just chillingly clear, and the encouragement for us is equally potent. The answer to that deep, deceiving pride is the fear of the Lord.
It's a deep faith in his specific spoken promises and a heart that refuses, under all circumstances, to rejoice when a neighbor suffers. We all have our seer, our place of perceived safety. So as you go about your day, let this provocative thought shape your reflection. What personal grudge or what national or financial cliff, physical, intellectual, or material, are you trusting in right now for your absolute security, rather than resting fully in the covenant-keeping God who remembers mercy and keeps truth forever?
May the Lord grant you the wisdom to walk humbly before him, the grace to forgive quickly, and the faith to fully trust his unwavering promises today and always.